The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night, or maybe it was just the tension simmering in the air. Jimmy Kimmel's set, with its familiar blue backdrop and polished desk, hummed with the usual pre-show buzz. The audience was packed, their chatter a low roar, anticipation crackling like static. Johnny Depp was the headliner, a rare get for the show. His name alone, enough to spike ratings. He'd been out of the public eye for a while, dodging the relentless churn of headlines, so his appearance was a coup. Backstage though, things weren't as smooth as the producers hoped. Johnny arrived late, pulling up in a black SUV with tinted windows, his entourage spilling out like shadows. He wore a weathered leather jacket, a scarf loose around his neck, and those signature tinted glasses that made it hard to read his eyes. The stage manager, a wiry guy named Paul, greeted him. With a clipboard and a nervous smile, "Mr. Depp, we're thrilled to have you. Jimmy's got some great questions lined up." Johnny nodded, but his expression was distant, like he was already somewhere else. Paul noticed the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes, and the way his fingers tapped a restless rhythm on his thigh. In the green room, Johnny paced, ignoring the spread of artisanal snacks and bottled water. His manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, hovered nearby, scrolling through her phone, muttering about press schedules. "You good, Johnny?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer, just kept pacing, his boots scuffing the carpet. A production assistant popped in, headset crackling. "5 minutes, Mr. Depp." He gave a curt nod, but his jaw tightened, like he was bracing for something. On set, Jimmy was in his element, cracking jokes with the warm-up comedian, loosening the crowd. His suit was crisp, his grin practiced, but he'd been warned about Johnny. The network execs had called it a sensitive booking. Johnny's recent years had been a storm of lawsuits, tabloid fodder, and public feuds, and nobody knew which version of him would show up tonight. The easygoing pirate, the brooding artist, or something else entirely. Jimmy's team had prepped safe questions: his latest film, a quirky indie project, and some light banter about his eccentric style. But Jimmy, ever the opportunist, had a few spicier prompts tucked away, hoping to coax out a viral moment. The band kicked into the show's theme, all brass and swagger, and the audience erupted as Jimmy bounded out, waving, his monologue sharp and topical. He riffed on politics, a viral cat video, and a quick jab at a rival host. Then, the moment arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, the one, the only, Johnny Depp." The crowd roared, a wave of applause crashing over the set. Johnny stepped out, his gait slow, almost deliberate, like a man walking into a room he wasn't sure he wanted to be in. He waved, a half-hearted gesture, and settled into the guest chair, crossing one leg over the other. His smile was thin, more polite than warm. Jimmy leaned forward, all charm. "Johnny, man, it's been a minute. You look like you just stepped off a pirate ship." The audience laughed, and Johnny chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, well, I've been hiding out, Jimmy," he said, his voice low, gravelly, with that familiar drawl. "You know how it goes." The crowd ate it up, but there was an edge to his tone, something that made Jimmy's producer, watching from the control booth, shift in her seat. She scribbled a note, "Keep it light." The first few minutes went smooth. Jimmy lobbed softballs Johnny's new film, a passion project about a reclusive painter. Johnny warmed up a bit, spinning a story about getting lost in the role, painting his own hands to feel the character. The audience was rapt, hanging on his every word, his charisma still magnetic despite the years of wear. But Jimmy, sensing the crowd's energy, decided to nudge the conversation toward riskier territory. "So, Johnny," he said, leaning in, with a grin, "you've had quite a ride these past few years. People are dying to know, what's the real story behind all the noise?" The question hung in the air, vague enough to seem innocent, pointed enough to sting. Johnny's smile faltered. Just for a second, he shifted in his seat, uncrossing his legs, his fingers tightening around the armrest. "The real story," he repeated, his voice quieter now, almost a calm. "You tell me, Jimmy, you've read the headlines, haven't you?" The audience laughed, thinking it was a quip, but Jimmy's grin twitched. He hadn't expected pushback so soon. In the control booth, the producer muttered into her headset, "Steer it back, Jimmy." But Jimmy, ever the showman, doubled down. "Oh, come on, man, give us something. You're Johnny Depp. You've got stories the tabloids couldn't dream up." The crowd cheered, egging him on, oblivious to the tightening of Johnny's jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward the exit. The studio air seemed to thicken as Johnny leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming a slow, deliberate beat on the armrest. The audience, still buzzing from Jimmy's prodding, didn't catch the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared, like a man readying for a fight. Jimmy, though, saw it. His instincts, honed from years of navigating live TV, screamed to pivot, but the lure of a viral moment was too strong. He pressed on, his voice playful but sharp. "No, seriously, Johnny, you've been through the ringer. Lawsuits, headlines, the whole circus. How do you keep your head above water?" Johnny's eyes, hidden behind those tinted lenses, locked onto Jimmy's. For a moment, the studio felt smaller, the crowd's murmurs fading into a distant hum. "You want to talk about the circus?" Johnny said, his voice low, almost a growl. "How about the one we're in right now? You sit there, Jimmy, with your desk and your cue cards, and you think you can boil my life down to a punchline." The audience let out a nervous laugh, unsure if this was part of the act. Jimmy's smile held, but his eyes flicked to the side, where a producer's shadow loomed just off stage. In the control booth, the tension was palpable. The director, a veteran named Lisa, hissed into her headset, "Jimmy, pull back now." But Jimmy, ever the gambler, leaned in closer, his grin widening to mask the unease. "Come on, Johnny, we're just having fun here. The people love you. They want to know what makes you tick." He gestured to the crowd, who erupted in cheers, feeding the energy Jimmy thrived on. But Johnny wasn't playing along. He tilted, his head, studying Jimmy like a painter sizing up a canvas. "What makes me tick?" he repeated, his voice softer now, almost dangerous. "Maybe I'm tired of people like you thinking they've got me figured out." The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. Backstage, Claire, Johnny's manager, had stopped scrolling her phone. She stood frozen, her eyes darting between Johnny and the stage manager, who was whispering urgently into his headset. Paul, the stage manager, caught her gaze and mouthed, "What's he doing?" Claire shook her head, her lips tight. She'd seen Johnny like this before, not often, but enough to know it could go south fast. He wasn't just reacting. He was recalculating, like a chess player spotting a trap. On set, Jimmy tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. All right, let's talk about something lighter," he said, flipping through his cue cards with a forced chuckle. "Your new film, man, it's got this wild vibe. Tell us about working with that director. What's his name? The guy with the crazy beard." The question was a lifeline, a chance for Johnny to pivot to neutral territory. But Johnny wasn't. Biting, he leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, his scarf slipping slightly to reveal a faint scar along his collarbone. "You know what, Jimmy," he said, his voice steady but laced with something raw. "I didn't come here to talk about beards or movies. I came because I thought, maybe, just maybe, you'd ask me something real." The audience was dead silent now, the kind of quiet that makes every rustle of clothing or creak of a chair deafening. Jimmy's producer in the booth was on her feet, gesturing wildly at the assistant director. "Cut to commercial if he keeps going," she snapped, but the director shook his head. "We're live, Lisa, we ride this out." Jimmy, for the first time that night, looked genuinely rattled. He'd pushed buttons before plenty of times, but this was different. Johnny wasn't just deflecting, he was dismantling the game Jimmy played so well, something real. Jimmy said, trying to regain control, his voice a touch too bright. "Okay, Johnny, hit me. What's real for you right now?" It was a bold move, doubling down on the challenge, but Jimmy was banking on Johnny backing off, maybe tossing out a quirky anecdote to lighten the mood. Instead, Johnny smiled a slow, almost predatory grin that didn't match the playful vibe Jimmy was fishing for. "Real is knowing every word I say here gets twisted," Johnny said. "Real is walking into a room full of people waiting for me to fall apart so they can sell the story. You want real, Jimmy? How about you tell me why you're so desperate to dig into my life instead of your own?" The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that echoed through the studio. Jimmy's face froze, his grin stuck like a mask. For a split second, the polished host was gone, replaced by a man caught off guard. The band, usually quick with a sting to smooth over awkward moments, stayed silent, the drummer's sticks hovering over his kit. Backstage, Claire was already moving, her heels clicking as she headed toward the stage entrance. Paul grabbed her arm. "Don't," he whispered. "Let him handle it." But Claire's eyes were blazing. "Handle it," she hissed. "He's about to burn this whole thing down." The studio lights seemed to pulse, casting long shadows across the set as Johnny's words hung in the air like smoke. The audience, caught between shock and fascination, leaned forward in their seats, their earlier cheers replaced by a tense hush. Jimmy's face, usually a canvas of effortless charm, betrayed a flicker of panic. His eyes darting to the floor manager, who stood frozen off stage, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Johnny, meanwhile, looked almost serene, his hands now, still, resting loosely in his lap, but that calm was deceptive, like the quiet before a storm breaks. Jimmy cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Whoa, Johnny, you're coming in hot tonight," he said, trying to reclaim the room. He adjusted his tie, a nervous tick, and leaned back in his chair, hoping to reset the rhythm. "I mean, I'm just asking what the fans want to know. Right, folks?" He turned to the audience, arms spread, coaxing a ripple of applause. But it was weak, uncertain, like they weren't sure whose side to take. Johnny didn't flinch, his gaze steady, cutting through Jimmy's deflection like a blade. "You think that's what they want?" Johnny said, his voice soft but piercing, each word deliberate. He gestured toward the crowd, his scarf swaying slightly. "These people didn't come here to watch you play gotcha with my life. They're here because they've stuck with me. Through the noise, through the lies, and you're sitting there, acting like you're doing them a favor by dragging it all up again. His tone wasn't angry, not yet, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. The studio smaller. Backstage, Claire was a whirlwind. Her phone now pressed to her ear as she whispered furiously to someone on the other end. No, he's not leaving yet, she snapped, her eyes locked on Johnny through the stage monitor. But if Jimmy keeps pushing, I can't promise he won't. Paul, the stage manager, hovered nearby, his headset crackling with orders from the control booth. Tell Jimmy to pivot to the movie. Now, Lisa's voice barked through the line. Paul nodded, but his face said he knew it was too late for that. The script was unraveling, and Johnny was holding the threads. On set, Jimmy tried to pivot anyway, his instincts kicking in. All right, Johnny, let's talk about something else, he said, flipping through his cue cards with a touch too much urgency. You've got this new project, right? That painter role. I heard you went method, like really deep into it. Tell us about that. It was a desperate swing back to safe ground, but Johnny wasn't following. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his tinted glasses catching the light. You don't get it, do you? He said, almost to himself. You think you can just change the subject, like I'm here to play your game. The audience stirred, a mix of murmurs and uneasy laughter. A woman in the front row clutched her purse, her eyes wide, like she was witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Jimmy's producer, Lisa, was pacing in the control booth now, her voice sharp in the director's ear. If he walks, we're screwed. Get Jimmy to de-escalate. But Jimmy, caught in the moment, couldn't resist one last jab. My game, he said, raising an eyebrow, his tone teasing but brittle. Johnny, this is late-night TV. It's all a game, you know that better than anyone. That was the spark. Johnny's jaw tightened, and he sat back, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles paled. Maybe I'm done with games, he said, his voice low, final. He stood, abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor, a sound that cut through the studio like a gunshot. The audience gasped, a collective jolt, as Johnny ripped off his mic, the small black clip dangling from his jacket. You want a show, Jimmy? Find someone else to be your clown. He turned, his boots heavy on the stage, and started walking toward the wings. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some shouting for him to stay, a chaotic mix of support and confusion. Jimmy was on his feet now, his hands raised, trying to salvage the moment. Johnny, come on, man, don't do this, he called, his voice cracking with a mix of desperation and disbelief. But Johnny didn't look back. He moved with purpose, his silhouette sharp against the stage lights, heading for the exit. Backstage, Claire was already there, her phone forgotten, her hand reaching for Johnny as he stormed past. Johnny, wait, she said, but he shook his head, his expression unreadable behind those glasses. In the booth, Lisa slammed her hand on the console. Go to commercial, she shouted, and the director scrambled to cue the band. The music kicked in, too loud, too late, as the screen faded to a detergent ad. But the audience wasn't watching the monitors. Their eyes were on the stage, where Jimmy stood alone, his smile gone, the empty chair beside him, a silent accusation. The studio was a frozen tableau as the commercial break jingle faded, the bright detergent ad on the monitors a jarring contrast to the chaos left on set. Jimmy stood rooted behind his desk, his hand still raised as if he could summon Johnny back by sheer will. The audience buzzed, their whispers swelling into a low roar, some craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Johnny's retreating figure through the stage wings. The empty chair beside Jimmy seemed to mock him, its silence louder than the crowd's murmurs. In the control booth, Lisa was a storm of motion, barking orders into her headset. Get me a feed from backstage, now, she snapped, her eyes glued to the monitors. And someone find out where Depp's headed. Backstage, Johnny moved like a man possessed, his boots echoing in the narrow hallway. Claire matched his stride, her voice sharp but low. Johnny, stop. You can't just walk out like that. You know what they'll do with this? He didn't slow down, his scarf trailing behind him like a flag of defiance. Let them, he said, his voice flat. Final, I'm done dancing for their cameras. Claire grabbed his arm, her grip firm, but he shook her off. Not roughly, but with a quiet resolve that made her pause. She'd seen him stubborn before, but this was different, less anger, more exhaustion. Like a man who'd carried too much for too long. Paul, the stage manager, hovered a few steps behind, his clipboard forgotten, his headset crackling with Lisa's voice. Paul, get him back on set, she ordered. But Paul just shook his head, muttering, he's not coming back. He'd worked enough shows to know when a guest was done, and Johnny's exit wasn't theater, it was a line drawn in the sand. The hallway led to a side exit, where Johnny's SUV waited, its engine already running. The driver, a shadow behind tinted glass. Claire tried again, her tone softer now. Johnny, think about this. You walk out, it's all they'll talk about, not the movie, not you, just this. He stopped, just for a moment, his hand on the door. Maybe that's the point. he said, and pushed through. On set, the commercial break was winding down, the band's music swelling as the floor manager signaled for the audience to settle. Jimmy had sunk back into his chair, his face a mask of forced calm, but his fingers tapped a frantic rhythm on the desk. The producer's voice buzzed in his earpiece. "Jimmy, you've got 30 seconds. We go live. You pivot to the next segment. No mention of Depp unless he comes back." Jimmy nodded, though no one could see it, and forced a smile as the stage lights flared back to life. "All right, folks," he said as the cameras rolled, his voice a touch too bright. "Let's keep this party going. Up next, we've got a hilarious clip from." He trailed off, his eyes flicking to the empty chair, the words catching in his throat. The audience wasn't buying it. Their attention was split, half on Jimmy, half on the wings where Johnny had vanished. A few pulled out their phones, already typing, the glow of screens dotting the crowd like fireflies. Social media was igniting, posts and clips of Johnny's walkout spreading faster than the production team could track. In the booth, Lisa watched the monitors, her face grim. "We're trending," she muttered, scrolling through her tablet. And not in a good way. The hashtags were brutal. #DeppWalks, #KimmelFlop, #JohnnySnaps. The narrative was already slipping out of their control. Outside, Johnny slid into the SUV, the door slamming shut with a thud that echoed in the quiet alley. Claire climbed in after him, her phone buzzing with messages from publicists, reporters, and the studio. "This is a mess, Johnny," she said, her voice tight but not accusing. He didn't respond, just stared out the window, his tinted glasses reflecting the city lights. The driver pulled away, the tires crunching on gravel, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of the engine. Then Johnny spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They wanted a show. They got one." Back in the studio, Jimmy pushed through the segment, his jokes landing flat, the audience's energy drained. The band played louder, as if to drown out the awkwardness. But the empty chair loomed large, a silent co-star stealing the spotlight. Lisa, in the booth, was already on the phone with the network, her voice low and urgent. "We need damage control. Now, get PR on this before it's tomorrow's headline." But she knew it was too late. The story wasn't theirs anymore, it was Johnny's, and he'd written it his way. The SUV glided through the city, its tinted windows shielding Johnny from the neon blur outside. The streets were alive with late-night traffic, but inside the car, the silence was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of Claire's phone as notifications piled up. She scrolled through them, her face lit by the screen's glow, her expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "They're already spinning it," she said, not looking at Johnny. "Half the posts say you had a breakdown, the other half say you owned Kimmel. This is going viral. Johnny, you know that, right?" He didn't answer, just kept staring out the window, his fingers tracing the edge of his scarf. The city lights caught the lenses of his glasses, hiding his eyes, but his jaw was set, unyielding. Back at the studio, the show limped on. Jimmy had moved to a segment with a comedian, a safe bet to lighten the mood, but the audience was distracted, their phones still glowing as they typed furiously. The empty chair remained, a ghost on set, and Jimmy's glances at it were subtle but telling. In the control booth, Lisa was in crisis mode, fielding calls from network execs while monitoring the social media storm. "We need a statement," she muttered to the assistant director, who was frantically typing notes. "Something neutral, something that doesn't throw Jimmy under the bus." But the posts were relentless, clips of Johnny's walkout racking up views, fans and critics alike dissecting every word, every gesture. The narrative was fracturing. Some called Johnny unhinged, others a hero for calling out the media's game. In the SUV, Claire set her phone down, her patience thinning. "You can't just sit there, Johnny," she said, her voice sharper now. "You lit a match back there, and now we're dealing with the fire. Talk to me, what's the plan?" He finally turned to her, his expression unreadable behind those glasses. "Plan," he said, his voice low, almost amused. "There's no plan, Claire. I said what I said. I walked because I meant it. They don't get to poke at me like I'm some circus act." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I get it, Johnny, I do, but you just handed them a story on a platter. They'll eat you alive for this." Johnny leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes for the first time since they'd left the studio. "Let them," he said, quieter now, the edge gone from his voice. "They've been doing it for years. What's one more headline?" There was a weariness in his tone, a glimpse of the man beneath the myth, the one who'd spent decades under scrutiny, his life carved up for public consumption. Claire softened, just a fraction, and reached for her phone again. "I'm calling the publicist. We need to get ahead of this before it's everywhere." But Johnny shook his head. "No statements," he said, "let it burn." At the studio, the show was wrapping, the band playing out the final credits as Jimmy forced a grin, waving to the crowd. But the energy was gone, the audience filing out, their conversations buzzing with what they'd just witnessed. Backstage, Paul was fielding questions from the crew, who were already gossiping about the fallout. "Is Kimmel in trouble?" one grip asked, coiling cables. Paul shrugged, his face tired. Depends on how the network spins it. But Johnny, he's the story, now. Lisa, still in the booth, was on her third call with the network, her voice hoarse. We'll say it was a misunderstanding, that Johnny wasn't feeling well. We can salvage this. But even she didn't sound convinced. Outside, the SUV pulled into a quiet lot near Johnny's hotel, the driver cutting the engine. Claire was typing again, drafting a message despite Johnny's orders. You might not care about the headlines, she said, not looking up, but I do. We've got your film to think about. Your team, this isn't just about you. Johnny opened the door, the cool night air rushing in. Maybe it should be, he said, stepping out. He paused, one hand on the door, and looked back at her. I'm not running anymore, Claire. If they want to fight, they've got one. He shut the door, his boots crunching on the pavement as he walked toward the hotel, his silhouette fading into the dark. The internet was ablaze now, clips of the Walkout trending worldwide, fans rallying with hashtags like #StandWithJohnny, while others tore into him, calling it a tantrum. The story was no longer about the show, was about Johnny Depp, the man who'd stopped playing by the rules. The hotel lobby was dim, its marble floors catching the faint glow of chandeliers. Johnny moved through it like a shadow, his boots silent now, his scarf loosed around his shoulders. The concierge, a young man with a practiced smile, nodded but kept his distance, sensing the weight Johnny carried. Behind him, Claire lingered at the entrance, her phone still in hand, her thumb hovering over a draft statement she hadn't sent. She watched him disappear into the elevator, its doors closing, with a soft chime, and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. This isn't over, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else, and stepped outside to call the publicist. By morning, the story had metastasized. News outlets ran with it, their headlines screaming variations of Johnny Depp storms. Off Kimmel and Depp's meltdown shocks fans. Clips of the Walkout dominated social media, dissected by bloggers, pundits, and fans who saw what they wanted: Johnny as a rebel, a victim, a loose cannon. The show's PR team scrambled, releasing a vague statement about unforeseen circumstances and wishing Johnny well, but it did little to stem the tide. Jimmy, back at his apartment, watched the coverage on his laptop, his coffee untouched. He'd been in the game long enough to know how this played out. By tomorrow, he'd be the villain or the victim, depending on the spin. But he couldn't shake the image of Johnny's face, that quiet defiance, like a man who'd finally stopped caring what the world thought. In his hotel suite, Johnny stood by the window, the city sprawling below, a maze of lights and shadows. He hadn't slept, hadn't even taken off his jacket. His phone sat on the table, screen dark, ignored despite the endless notifications. He'd meant what he said to Claire. He was done running. The lawsuits, the headlines, the years of being picked apart had built a cage he'd finally kicked open. Walking off that stage wasn't just impulse, it was a declaration. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in years, he felt unburdened. Like he'd reclaimed something the world had tried to take. Downstairs, Claire was in damage control mode, meeting with the publicist in a corner of the hotel bar. We need to pivot to the film, she said, her voice low, urgent. Get the focus back on his work, not this circus. The publicist, a wiry man with tired eyes, shook his head. It's too late for that. This is the story now. Best we can do is lean into it. Let Johnny tell his side before they write it for him. Claire frowned, her fingers tapping the table. He won't. You heard him. He's done talking. The publicist sighed, glancing at his phone, where another news alert flashed. Then we've got a war on our hands. Online, the fans were rallying. Hashtags like #JohnnySpeaks and #Truth for Depp trended alongside the vitriol, with supporters posting old interviews, clips of his quieter moments, painting a picture of a man pushed too far. Others weren't so kind, calling him unstable, a has-been, chasing relevance. The truth, as always, was messier, but the internet didn't deal in nuance. Every post, every comment, was another brick in the wall of a story no one fully understood, not Jimmy, not Claire, not even the fans. Back at the studio, the crew was already dismantling the set for the next show. Paul, the stage manager, stood by the empty chair, now just another prop, and shook his head. Never seen anything like it, he said to a lighting tech, who nodded, coiling cables. Guy's got balls, I'll give him that. Lisa, still reeling from the night, was in a meeting with the network, her tablet open to a spreadsheet of viewership numbers. The Walkout had spiked ratings, but the cost was steep. Sponsors were nervous, and Jimmy's team was bracing for a PR storm. He'll bounce back, Lisa told the execs, but her voice lacked conviction. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a shift, a moment that would linger. In his suite, Johnny poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't drink, just held it, staring out at the city. The world would keep spinning, keep writing his story. But for once, he'd taken the pen. He'd walked off that stage not to end the conversation, but to start one he'd control. On his terms, the cost would be high, the noise louder than ever. But he was ready. The man who'd played pirates and poets, rebels and outcasts, was done being anyone's punchline.